It's my privilege to introduce Dr. De La Fuente. He is a sesame breeder at Sesaco Corporation. He took his bachelor's in plant and environmental science in 2010. He is a former graduate student here at Texas A&M, where he got his master's in plant breeding in 2012. And he took his Ph.D. in Iowa State University in 2015. So without further ado, please give us a hand, Dr. De La Fuente.
Thank you for the introduction. It's great to be back here at A&M. It's been a while since I've given a presentation, since my defense actually, so bear with me if I'm a little rusty. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about sesame breeding. I think this is the one. Yes. So we're the only company in the United States that does sesame breeding, and I'm one of the 3 breeders, my boss being one, and my colleague Caleb Warrington being the other. And so today I'm just going to talk a little bit about what sesame is, because the first question that I always get asked is, well, like on your hamburger bun? And yeah, it's just like on your hamburger bun, but also a lot of other uses. So it's an exciting crop to work on, and it's a lot of fun, and I think it'll be an interesting presentation. So who we are as a company, we do a full scope of things. So the company's structure is not just seed sales. So that's part of what we do, but we also contract with the farmer. So for example, we go out to a farmer here in the Brazos Valley and we say, hey, you want to grow sesame? They set a price and it's per acre production. Whatever they bring, we buy it back. And then we clean that seed, make it into ingredient also, and we sell that around the world. So just a few pictures of some stuff here. Up in the top left is my colleague Zach Carpenter, who just started. He's our weed scientist, so we do crop protection and agronomy research also. In the top center, some of our employees at our Detroit dehulling plant where they make tahini, and just us out in the field helping farmers get their planters going. So it's a very hands-on job, which suits me very well. For the people in here that do know me, it suits me well. So what we do, we have 3 major divisions in the company. There are others also that are in support of this and do a lot of important things for us. But research and development, which is what I work in. So there's 4 of us, my boss, my colleague Caleb, me, who all do the breeding program, and then Zach Carpenter, who we just brought on, who does our crop protection and crop production, weed science and agronomy work. And so that's just a picture of one of our plots up in the Panhandle. And then at the next stage, if you go through the process of how things work, our production division does our contracting and farmer support. So they help the farmers from when they contract with us to planting, helping set their planter, helping them set their combine, any problems that they have during the season with growing, and they support them the entire way through until the day of harvest, when that truck takes it from the field to our receiver. And then from the receiver, our operations division takes over. They handle the sesame. They bring it to our cleaning plant in Hobart. They clean it with a color sorter, with sieves, with a lot of really cool technology there, and create the nice, pretty product that you see in the stores. And then it is either sent to our processing plant to be made into tahini, or it's sold around the world, and could be in something that you ate if you've had sesame recently. So the most popular question that I get when I tell people what I do, what do you do, Gerald? Oh, I'm a sesame breeder. Well, what does sesame look like? So I figured I'd put a few slides together. It's probably kind of hard to see the top left picture, but that's just the reality of what it is. It's really hard to see it when it comes up. When you look down the row after you plant, it's a little unnerving, because you can imagine a sesame seed on your hamburger bun. That's what comes out of the ground. It is tiny and it is extremely difficult to grow. But we have a lot of great farmers that have helped us out along the way, learning how to grow sesame. So, and then as it matures early on, about the 14-day mark is the second picture, we get a lot of vegetative growth, but it doesn't grow in height very rapidly. Pairs of leaves come on every couple days. Then that vegetative growth starts to accelerate into the third picture and the fourth picture, where it's just about to flower right about the 40, 45 day mark, depending on the maturity of the line. And then the bottom left picture, looking at just a few blooms starting, and then mid bloom there in the center picture with lots of blooms littering the ground around it. So it's a pair of flowers a day that bloom and fall off. And then in the right picture is at the end of flowering. And so I have also some other pictures of what it looks like after it's done. So who's had sesame in the last week? I'll ask the same question. Well, cool, good. Lots of different uses for it. The most popular one that people know is like on my hamburger bun. And yes, that's one way you eat it. Another way it can be eaten is tahini, which is what's in the bowl, which is just a sesame butter in essence. It has a strong taste, but it's a kind of a peanut buttery taste. It's really good if that's a kind of thing, a kind of flavor you like. But we've also had some stuff in our breeding program that tastes terrible. So that's one of the components that we work at. It has a really strong aftertaste if it's not very good. In the right picture, the upper bags of seed made by a company called TH Foods. You can find it at Walmart. We sell sesame to them. So if you want to get some American grown sesame, go grab you a couple bags of Crunchmaster crackers. They're pretty good. So around the world, sesame production is almost completely unmechanized. So they grow it all by harvesting it by hand. They harvest it before it dries down. They shock it. They put it in bundles, let it dry, and then they just turn it upside down, shake it a few times, and you get the seed out. Now, that would never really take off here in the U.S., which is what our company's claim to fame is. So you see the production has increased here in recent years as demand for sesame has grown in some of the more health food markets and as Asian cuisine becomes more popular. But the yield is kind of just stagnated. It hasn't really changed. It's gone up a little bit as agronomy has improved in different parts of the world. But if you look at the red line on the left side, that's the Americas, all the Americas. And so that we are just a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket of world production. But it's still quite a bit what we do here in the U.S. So sesame production in the U.S. is completely mechanized. There was no way we were going to come in and get a farmer to grow something that they had to harvest by hand that wasn't of extremely high value. So this isn't a extremely high value crop. So most of the production, as you can see in the green, comes out of Oklahoma. Our farmers there like it as a rotation because they can use their exact same equipment. You can see in the right picture there's their combine that they use to harvest wheat. And the bottom picture, their no-till air drill that they would use to plant their wheat. They just throw sesame in it and go for it. They find a whole new set of problems because all the tiny little holes that wouldn't let wheat fall out, sesame falls out of it. So they find all the holes in their combines and planters when we have them plant sesame for us. So there's also production in Texas. Most of it, you can see here on this slide, is down in the Rio Grande Valley. And then west of San Antonio into the Winter Garden, which is where I'm based out of. The entire breeding program is actually based out of there. Then as you move up into the rolling plains and into southwestern Oklahoma and northern Oklahoma, a large percentage of our acreage comes from that part of the United States. And if you move out into the southeast, we also have production there. But we have some problems with production in the southeast because it's a very humid climate and we have a lot of issues with late season rainfall affecting harvest and affecting the quality of the seed. So for now, our concentration is into our main growing regions in the valley and the Winter Garden and the rolling plains, and then into northern Oklahoma and pushing into Kansas a little bit as we work on some of the maturity that I'll talk about here in a minute. So a question that I was not really prepared to answer when I walked out of graduate school was, how do you start a breeding program? Now, the breeding program that existed before me dates back to the 1940s. They worked on sesame there, moved to the United States. Now, this wasn't the company. This was the father-son team that worked on sesame. They moved from Venezuela, where they started, into California, and from California to Yuma, and from Yuma to Texas. And so the company was started, I believe, in the 1980s, and it came together with the idea of selling sesame in the United States while at the same time developing varieties that are mechanically harvested so that would be acceptable for U.S. farmers. And so we've really had to learn along the way. So similar to what the tropical fruit story is, I guess, from my side of it and in the industry, it was a very figure everything out as we go kind of situation. So this is the first thing I walked into. This is actually a picture I took on my first day of work, and I had no idea. I didn't know what sesame looked like. I didn't know what it was supposed to look like. Half of it was dead, half of it was still alive, and that's my colleague Caleb, who was giving me a big thumbs up for all the sesame that we had laying on the ground. So we had a lot of lodging and stuff falling over and disease and unknowns. We didn't know where to start. And one of the biggest things that we did there was just screen out everything that fell over. I mean, it was pretty simple, but that was just the first step in a large amount of new questions that we had to answer. And thankfully, Caleb came from a soybean breeding program, so he had a lot of expertise with breeding a inbreeding crop, which sesame is. And so we had a lot of growing pains. The picture on the right is just a regular sized pocket knife. So there you can see the tiny little seed emerging through the ground as it's coming to the surface, and it's susceptible to about 1/10 of an inch, 2/10 of an inch of rain that come at the wrong time and hard. It will not come up. So that was a very new challenge. And the other two pictures you see are what comes from too much rain at the wrong time, which being the wrong time is usually right before it comes out of the ground. You'll get a crust and the sesame is just not strong enough to push through, whereas other crops will just kind of pop out and push the dirt out of the way. The sesame will just lock up underneath the soil, and that was a big issue that we had to deal with as we were getting started. And so my boss likes to take funny pictures of me, and this is kind of what I feel like sometimes. I got my head stuck in the back of the thrasher because we had a little bit of an issue, because it was mixing seed, because the thrasher was designed to do bigger seed, corn, soybeans, wheat, other things. And so they never foresaw the problem that we had with seed mixing getting caught, because sesame is so flat, it slips up under all these places that are sealed up. And one of the biggest challenges that we've had is the percentage of plots that we see that make it from planting all the way to harvest, where we actually realize data off of a plot. The first year, we only planted a few. It was in 2016, and we saw more than 60% of those plots harvested. And I think also I was probably a little more forgiving of the plots that I allowed to make it to the end at that point, because we didn't really know what we were doing. In 2017, we expanded. We moved out into different regions. We planted a great deal more plots, and our realization went down because we lost a bunch. We had to replant a bunch. And then in 2018, we had a horrible year. We had plagues of too much rain at planting. We were running away from the rain in Oklahoma, running away from dry weather and drought down in South Texas. In the winter garden, we were having a similar issue. So we took that year, we stepped back, and we really thought about, okay, let's quit trying to plant just everything we can, and let's concentrate on planting those locations that we know we've had good success. And in 2019, we really rebounded and were able to look at a lot more plots and have a lot more data going forward. So that was really nice, and it was a challenge, but it's been exciting. So the breeding program is pretty simple, which is phenotypic selection. We make selections on progeny rows. We run it through a yield trial program, and then we consider all the different factors of quality along the way. We have brought it from a very simplistic program that existed with 1 or 2 nurseries in South Texas, sending lines out to Oklahoma and to many different environments while making the selections there. And we've made a replicated multi-environment testing program with the addition of some new technology. We've brought the technology for planting and harvest and taking notes and all that. So there was no way for us, no database, no anything. So we brought all that together, and the 3 of us kind of the different experiences, my boss being a vegetable breeder, Caleb being working in soybeans, and me having come from corn, all came together, and we were able to collaborate very well and come up with the breeding program that we work with. So one of the first things we did in 2017 is we took our commercial varieties that were in the program already and being grown by farmers, and we grew them at every location that we planted that year, because we weren't really sure if the varieties that were made for a specific region really belonged there, because there was no true replicated testing in the past. There was some testing done at our nursery west of San Antonio, but there was really nothing done beyond that. And we were also trying to figure out where we needed to be breeding. Did it suffice that we bred there in west of San Antonio and Canipa, or did we need to move out into the outlying locations? Our gut told us that we did, and it's true. We have to move out and breed in those environments. It makes sense. So they clustered as we would have expected. Northern Oklahoma, the 2 locations that we tested there clustered together. The 2 locations in the Rolling Plains clustered together, and then our locations down in the Winter Garden and South Texas clustered together. So that gave us some confidence that we knew what we were thinking of, where we needed to be breeding, and where the production of sesame was exactly what we were going to try and move forward with. So we developed a regional breeding program. So we essentially run 4 unique breeding programs. All the 4 of us together run each of them out of San Antonio, but with nurseries at all these outlying locations. So the Rio Grande Valley, our first, we moved from south to north, has a really high yield potential. It's irrigation. Some dry land, has a nice long season. We have multiple seasons in the valley. We'll have spring planting with a summer harvest, and then a late summer planting with a fall and winter harvest too. The Winter Garden, which is the 4 or 5 county area to the west of San Antonio. They call it that because we grow a lot of vegetables during the winter there. We have some of the highest yield potentials there because this is where the breeding program was, and all selection essentially has occurred there. And it also has the farmers that are the most seasoned. They've been growing sesame for the longest amount of time, and they have developed their methods for growing it, the right fertility, the right irrigation, the right timing for everything, crop protection. So they're able to bring in some of our better quality sesame and at higher yields. And so as we move up into the Rolling Plains, this is big cotton country. We've gone in there and shown the farmers that it's a great alternative to cotton. They have irrigation. It's been a little more difficult for us to get in there because it's a tough crop to grow, and there's just been some struggles in giving them the confidence to get a good stand, but we're moving towards that, and we've got a lot of good growers there that are doing a great job. And then as we move into northern Oklahoma and southern Kansas, we have a lot of very good growers up there that are seasoned sesame producers, and they do a great job. And it varies. They grow it with their planters, they grow it with their drills. It's dry land. We have some irrigation interspersed. The crop is usually terminated with a freeze. So as the crop matures, a freeze will come in and it ends it. And then they like it because it's a nice rotation for their wheat. So they'll plant sesame, plant wheat, and then come back and plant maybe sesame again or something else. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be pointing. Oh, there it goes. So just some of the things that we consider right now as we are in the youth of the breeding program. Yield is obviously a major component, which it is for all crops, but really for us, it's trying to give the farmers confidence that they can grow a high yielding crop that will net them some revenue. So things that have led into that are making sesame mechanically harvestable. The maturity of the line, the vigor of the seedlings to get it up and out of the ground and have a good stand, the type of branching that the sesame has, and I'll talk about that, some disease resistance to some of the diseases we have, and single and triple capsule, which I'll show some pictures of what that is. But there's also a big quality and flavor component to sesame. So it's very visual. When I ask my Japanese colleagues why, what is it about sesame? And it's a visual thing on their food. It makes it look nice, is part of it. So seed size, the sizes range from what you see on your hamburger bun to a little bit bigger and then significantly smaller. Dehulling and how well it dehulls. So what's on your hamburger bun or your bread is usually dehulled sesame. It's kind of a opaque-ish color, or not opaque, a translucent white color. And then oil composition and the acid value of the oil after it's harvested, and then the color of the seed. So I'll talk about some of these things. So seed color, I don't know, has anybody ever seen anything but white sesame other than here? Yeah, there's quite a few people that have seen it. So sesame comes in a variety of colors, the most popular being white and black. So black is about 10% of white, and then there's also another smaller market for what we call gold sesame. It's kind of an orangish yellow color, and that's 10% of the black market. And so what I've been told is that the black seed goes on to light colored foods, the white seed goes on to dark colored foods. So there's a range of colors that we see in the sesame, and it's very subjective, but it's an important part of our final product. We can't have a ugly brown seed and expect to sell it. So some of the initial questions that we had and found out pretty quickly that so black is dominant to white, and if you cross black with black, you get black seed. If you cross black seed with white seed, you get an array of colors, anything from a dark black to a light black, into the brown and orange, darker whites, and then into kind of a pale white color. But then one of the surprising things that we found out as we were starting to cross with some of the data that we generated was if you cross white with white, you get white most of the time. But then every now and then we started having brown seed come out of a white by white cross, and it would segregate out, which was very strange and interesting for us. And we don't particularly know why it happens. There's some theories that we have that there's some kind of complementation in some of these families that we work with that's creating a combination, giving a brown color. But for the most part, we're just trying to remove it from the breeding program. And we've done pretty good. So as long as we don't cross a black and white, which we do still do that, and if we do, we just remove the brown out. But we're removing these white lines that when crossed with another white will throw brown color, because that creates a big problem for us because the least desirable color is the brown. So most of all of the color is screened through. This is my boss. He is a vegetable breeder, so he's very, very good at looking at this color and being able to have an appreciation for the distinguishing things that make the darker black truly a darker black, because there are shades of black that we can see, and you can see that in the little green, I don't even know what you would call it, but the thing we use to grade the seed. So you can see as it varies through each color spectrum, it changes in color, and he does a really good job of picking out our best colored lines and helping us move those forward through the breeding program, because those nice colored lines help us in the market to get a better price or to get more contracts to sell it if we have a nice, pretty product. So one of the cool things about sesame is that there are tons of plant types. So there are single stems, just one main stem that the pods are set on. There are branching types. It's short, it's tall. As a height comparison, my colleague Caleb there in the top right, he's 6'6", and that sesame is significantly taller than him. And it has to do with genetics and also the production environment that it's in. But it's a really fun thing to walk through our progeny rows and see all of the diversity that we have. And not to say that other crops don't have it, but it's a lot of fun seeing all the differences in sesame, because it's almost unending variation that we get to look at, which is a lot of fun as a plant breeder. So a little bit of data here that I'll talk about. Forgive me, we had to remove some of the line names and stuff just because of IP things. So I'll go through this as best as I can. You see in the top picture there, and then the bottom left, that's a single stem variety. So the single stem varieties, they're just like they sound. They make a single stem versus branching out. The single stem varieties also create basal branches. So given enough space, they will create a pair of basal branches out the bottom of the plant. And usually our single stem varieties will tend to yield less in a row crop situation. So a true 30-inch, 36-inch, 40-inch row spacing. So our single stem varieties tend to be more for the drilled situation where the 7.5-inch or 15-inch spacing is preferred. But so the blue bars are a little bit less intensive of a production environment, so less fertilizer, less water. The single stem varieties are off on the left side of the graph. And so they tended to yield less there, but then when grown the same year in a highly productive environment with a little bit wider row spacing, they compensated for that a little bit and they made these basal branches. So it's not necessarily the case that the single stems are not useful. So we won't get rid of them out of the breeding program, and we're working towards them to be feeding into this drilled situation. But it's interesting to work with the two types and see how they fit into our different production schemes. So another really cool thing about sesame is that there are two different types of pod morphology that you can see. One of them is what we call a single capsule, which is what the two pictures on the left are showing, and the two pictures on the right are triple capsule. And so all it is on the single capsule, one node, you have a pair of capsules on each side. And on the triple capsule, you have 3 on each node. Well, when I first saw the triple capsule, I thought I had solved all the world's problems and we were going to have the highest yielding sesame ever and there was going to be no issue. Well, that's not the case. There are problems for both. There are advantages to both. So one of the big problems that we have is these little yellow things are called extrafloral nectaries. I have really no idea what their function is, other than they cause us problems when we're cleaning the seed, because that little black spot there in the picture of the sesame is that dried nectary, and we have trouble cleaning that out. So if you make it a triple capsule, then you remove that from the cleaning process. But the 2 pods on the side of the main tend to have smaller seed because they're flowering later. So then we have that issue because we want our seed to be as uniform as possible. So it's kind of a balance. Another issue with it is, like I said, when I first saw it, I thought I had solved everything. There was only a couple lines out there that were actually stable and triple capsule. And here's Caleb holding one of our progeny rows from this year with it. But they tend to be the middle of the road for yield. So when I tested those first lines the first year, the blue bars represent the yield for those triple capsule lines, whereas the green bars are the rest of our stuff. So there are things that are worse than it, but we've since discarded all of that. But our better yielding lines tend to be branched single capsule varieties. So we've gotten away from really concentrating on working the triple capsule. We still keep it around because it could have advantages for us to remove those nectaries from a cleaning problem. So vigor, like I mentioned, is a big issue, and one of the hardest things about sesame is getting a stand, and that has been extremely difficult for us to learn as well as our new growers to learn. It's a tiny seed, and when it comes up, it is susceptible to anything. Wind, high heat, just a little bit of dry dirt falling into the seed trench behind it. It's almost like planting a vegetable crop. It takes a lot of special care, but we can't treat it like a vegetable crop. So when we grow vegetables on the farm back home, the seed bed gets prepared beautifully. It's rid of all trash, and we go in and we plant it nice and shallow. We get it wet, we get a stand. Sesame, we're growing it on some of the harsher climates in Oklahoma into true no-till territory, into hard ground and wheat stubble, and expecting to get a stand there. So having good vigor to get the sesame up and out of the ground as fast as possible so that we can avoid rainfall, avoid it drying out before we get a stand is a very important thing. So one of the things we did to look at that was plant one of our trials really early in the season in the colder temperatures. So we're usually looking for about 60-degree nighttime temperatures to get an optimal emergence, or we're looking for this warming trend you see in the low temperatures there. So we planted on the 6th of April. And on the 11th of April, we got about 4/10 of an inch of rain. And that was enough to cause what you see in the second picture there. Lines that emerged after the rain or never emerged at all. They just didn't come up. They got locked up under the surface. And then we have some that emerged after. And then on the 16th of April, we got 4.5 inches of rain, which just exacerbated the situation. Anything that was too weak did not survive. So that's one of the important traits that we look at. And our commercial lines, you can see most of them are kind of middle of the road. So this is just a simple 1 to 5 rating that we give it. But we do have some good lines and we have some bad lines. But we also have a distribution of stuff for our experimental lines, and we're really trying to make sure we find those lines that are doing better at emergence and getting out of the ground faster and quicker and growing off faster so that we can avoid this problem. Because you can see in the bottom right there, that's what happens when they get locked up. They just swell. Their cells are continuing to divide and they're trying to push out of the soil, but they just can't. And it's a very frustrating thing to work for months to get a trial put together and then go plant it, and a couple tenths of an inch of rain ruin it. So we think that maybe seed size has something to do with it, but the problem that we have there is, like I said, the left picture, the seed in the right, is what you see on your hamburger bun, the normal size. There's also much smaller seed, which we generally just try to stay away from. But as the seed gets bigger, that's not necessarily better. There is a demand from our consumers to have a certain size and quality of seed, so we have to balance it out for what we see there. So another thing that we're working on too is maturity. So you see down in the valley, like I mentioned earlier, we have 2 planting and harvest windows. Into the winter garden, we have just a very wide window. People planted from May to August, harvesting from September to December. And then as we move up into Oklahoma and the rolling plains, we're looking at a May to July planting and a September to December harvest window. And I clicked too far, sorry. When we look at the distribution of the yields by each of the maturity ratings that we give it, right now we don't really see any difference. The stuff that we give an early score, or an early maturity rating, it yields about the same as the stuff on average that we have at the end. I expect that over time, as we develop earlier lines, that the earlier maturing stuff is going to yield lower and the later maturing stuff is going to yield a little more, given the time to grow. So given the time to grow down in the valley in our longer season, I expect that our longer maturing lines will do better. Whereas as we move up into Kansas a little bit, we won't be able to grow those same lines because they will run out of time before the freeze. So one of the cool things that we saw right away in 2017 was this little guy, this little line that we found, which was significantly earlier maturing than the rest of ours. And then the bottom picture there is a family of lines that we made from across there that is in progeny rows that we looked at this year. So we've selected a lot more 1 and 2 maturing lines, so earlier maturing. Instead of 120 day, maybe we're moving it towards 100 days. We're not really sure because we haven't tested yet, but that's something that we're going to be looking at this year. But really trying to find some earlier stuff as we move up into Oklahoma to kind of mitigate the risk of some of these fronts that we have. So like I mentioned earlier, there's different planting methods that we use, and we see just about everything. These are just 2 examples, some pictures that Caleb took of me helping some farmers get going. Anything from a big air drill, no-till drill there, to just a regular planter, down to 4-row planters, to regular wheat box drills, anything and everything you can think of. We've tried to get a stand and we've been successful. So we looked at population when we first got here. The school of thought was that you needed pounds of seed per acre. So they had not gotten to the point yet where they were able to confidently tell the farmers that you can singulate seed. So you think of a vacuum planter plate, the little holes on it, you need a tiny little hole for sesame, or else it's going to get sucked through and blow out the vacuum, or it's going to get stuck in the hole. So you need a tiny, tiny plate. And we've gotten to the point now where we've been able on our end to test the differences between planting 50,000 plants, which is about a half a pound, 100,000 plants, 200 and 300,000 plants. We plant all of our yield trials at 100,000 plants, which is about a plant every 2 inches or so. And we found that the yield from 100 to 200 and 300,000, it really doesn't make any difference. But as you push out into the 300,000s, you don't allow those plants to really show what they can be. They don't branch out. When they're packed in too tight, they're just single stems, and they compete with each other. They breed disease, and they create nothing but problems. On the other end of the spectrum, too low of a population, and you run the risk of not getting a sufficient stand. So we usually tell our farmers, look, overplant it a little bit, 200,000 plants per acre. If you get half a stand, you're still sitting perfect. So looking at a little bit of the yield numbers, and this is the first time when I was making this presentation that I'd actually looked at some of this stuff as a whole for the program. So we've looked at shattering, and my predecessor really is credited for creating those. Maturity, we're starting to look at seedling vigor. We're looking at type of branching, single and triple capsules, seed size, seed color. Those are the things that we've looked at up to this point. And the slides that I have here are actually really exciting, and a lot of the people in the company that have seen this are pretty excited that we're actually succeeding at what we're doing. The first year we planted in 2016, again, we were looking at just a huge number of lines. We didn't know where they belonged. We didn't know what they were bred for. We weren't really sure. We didn't have any yield data. We didn't have a whole lot of information on them except for what we were able to see and identify in the field. So our average yield for plots in 2016 was 794 pounds per acre. And then in 2017, we started to implement our regional breeding program, testing lines where we thought they belonged, replicated testing at different locations with different farmers under different agronomic regimes. And just by removing those lines and doing a little bit better of a job, we were able to move the mean yield of what we were looking at up pretty significantly. And then in 2018, we had a really rough year, and we didn't really do much because we had so many losses of trials and such a bad growing environment. So it was kind of frustrating that we hadn't really made much gain. But we tested again in 2019, and we realized that by removing those lines and testing them in the environments that we're supposed to test them in, we were able to move our average yield of all of our plots up to 1,238 pounds. So it's pretty cool. You see these pictures like this printed out in research when I was in graduate school, you know, how we've moved the mean of corn yield over the years. And it's pretty cool that over 4 years here, just by getting rid of some of the stuff that we didn't want and putting it in the places that we did, and also a really big important thing was that we were able to learn how to grow sesame. So if I could give, you know, the graduate students just a piece of advice, learn how to grow your crop. Because you may not have to when you go and step into a company that might be a bigger company where they have a full setup of a breeding program so that you can just, you know, give seed and you have people that are experts at putting it in the ground. In our case, we're putting it in the ground. And when we showed up, it was extremely difficult. But whatever the case may be, I still would encourage you, learn to grow your crop and be able to do it with confidence, because without us being able to grow it with confidence, we just can't do what we need to do. And it's very difficult with sesame to grow a crop. So it was really nice to see that we were able to move the average of our yields pretty significantly in a fairly short amount of time. And so what's changed? I mean, you can see the difference there in the pictures. The bottom picture is our first nursery when we walked in. Pretty rough looking, had a lot of problems. And then the upper picture is just this past year in 2019, our main location out west of San Antonio. We learned how to grow it. We learned how to fertilize it, the right lines at the right place. Obviously, this is a picture of like the prettiest part of the field that I took, but still, overall, the field looked really nice and we were really happy. And it was some of our highest yields recorded to date. So these are my nieces here standing in front of the sesame field there in Castroville. It's their dad's farm. And you can see how big the sesame is. We hit it with the right fertilizer at the right time, our best varieties out there, and we were able to even see a higher average, and we're starting to see yields in the 2,400 pound range. And that's really exciting because that's the kind of numbers the farmers are looking at us and saying, hey, that's what we need to turn away from a different crop and maybe grow this in lieu of growing that one on a few of our acres. And it's a really a big combination and cooperation between our farmers, our production team, and the breeding team, all bringing that together. This is definitely not just selection, I can guarantee you that, because we didn't know how to grow it when we first started. So other things that we're gonna try and look at going forward, definitely disease resistance. We've had some problems with different diseases. The previous nursery, but my predecessor's nursery, was grown on the same farm in a rotating fashion on 3 fields where they had lots of disease pressure. And so he made a lot of selections. And so a lot of our lines that we work with have already been rogued for those lines and families that don't have disease resistance. But we're also going to be working with Kim Cochran out in Uvalde from A&M, starting to look at some true pathology and maybe doing some mapping with that. So looking still at G by E, because we're not sure exactly what effect it's going to have on some of the more flavor or quality traits. We don't know exactly how flavor is being affected by different environments, but that's something that we'd have a lot of interest in. And one of the newer projects that we're working on is oil. So the percent oil is, there's a minimum spec for what we sell, and it's 52%. Anything below that, and we have to take a cut in our price. And so getting it up to 52% is one of our goals. So one of the things we've done is brought in some germplasm from the USDA, some collaborators out in Georgia that have the collection. He sent us a bunch of stuff that was over 60. We've crossed that in. We still haven't gotten that far enough through the program. We'll look at it for the first time this year in a progeny row. We got ourselves an NMR so we can measure oil non-destructively. Before we were having to send it off and have to pay to get it done and losing the seed. So we had to do it on a larger quantity of seed. Now we can do it on small quantities and make single plant selections as we work through a population, which is pretty exciting. But you can see here that those are clustered by environment and the same colors, the same lines. So you can see the general ranking of the lines is about the same. As we moved through the releases, the percent oil moved up, but obviously some environments do better than others, and we need to understand that and why. And if we can get a line that will maintain above 52% the whole time, that's the idea, because then we don't have to worry about any kind of segregation issues of keeping low oil seed and high oil seed separate, which makes it difficult for our operations division. So one of the questions I always get asked, and I think this is my last slide, is how to make crosses. Everybody always wants to know how to make crosses in sesame. It's actually pretty easy. It's a pretty big flower. You can see how big it is there with my boss's hand. He's the king of crossing. You go out the night before and you pull off the petal of tomorrow's flowers. So today's flowers are open and there's a pair, usually, sometimes 3. Tomorrow's flowers are right above it and still closed. You emasculate them by pulling it off. You just throw those away. We cut the leaves for that node and hang a tag. And then we do the same thing for the males, except we don't mark them. We just collect the flowers that bring the anthers with it, the petals of the flower and the anthers are connected. And we take that with us, store it in a little cup for the night. And then the next day we come out, and you can see there in the middle picture, you just rub the flower on the female and you have a cross. And it's usually about 40, 50 seed, which is really nice. And we really have no issues with making enough seed for a cross to move to the next generation. I thought it was going to be kind of a soybean-y thing. My colleague, Caleb, was a soybean breeder, and he said this is so much easier than soybeans. It's not even funny. So with that, I want to say thanks to the committee for inviting me out to speak at A&M. It's quite an honor to be here, and thanks to Corteva and everybody else that funded this event, and I'll open it up for any questions.
So a relatively simple question. You mentioned the quality cutoff of 52% oil, but are there other quality parameters that you're looking at on the sesame besides color? And
yes, so besides color, flavor is a big component, but right now we can't really quantify flavor. You don't know what it is because we bring in people, some of our buyers, and they taste it. Size of the seed is also a factor. How the seed develops is also a factor, depending on where it's. So it depends on the end user a little bit, but there's definitely factors beyond just
Okay. So yeah, I have a question. So basically, I have a couple of questions. So even there is a conflict in the literature saying that about the closed capsule this is a response of the insect, or this is an inheritable trait. So first of all, are you using the closed capsule in your breeding population? And what do you think about the pepper shell? Have you ever tried to combine the shot sesame or the closed capsule sesame with the pepper shell factor so far?
Try and make sure that answers your question. You're talking about breeding with wild relatives using.
Yeah, I'm talking about the closed capsule tray. So yeah.
So there is a mutant in sesame that's called seamless, I believe. Basically, the pod is completely sealed. But we tried that. And what happens is when you put it through the combine, it makes it. So yeah, it doesn't work very well. So the pod's open just a little bit at the tip. And the idea is to allow them to open and so that they're easily crashable, but that we don't lose them on the ground. We still do lose quite a bit.
Okay, one more question. What do you think about the determinate mutant in the sesame? Well,
so I don't know if I've ever actually seen the determinate mutant, to be perfectly honest. I think I did, and I think that we're trying to get some of it, but I think when I saw it, if I did see the one that I think it is, that it looks like the yield won't be there because it tends to grow very tall and be unadapted. Not saying that we couldn't bring that into our populations, but it seems that the structure of its flowering will not be conducive. But I think we're trying to get our hands on it.
Hi. How well has the genome been characterized? Is my mic?
Yes, so the Chinese have sequenced the entire genome. We are in the infancy of working on mapping. I don't know if Charlie Johnson's here today, but I'm going to meet with him on Friday because we're going to try and do some work with him, looking into some mapping because we very much like to. We haven't gotten to that point yet, to be perfectly honest. So the genome is sequenced, and as far as what other work has been done, I know there's been some mapping projects published, but we don't have the capability in-house.
So you hope eventually to do marker-assisted breeding?
We do, yeah.
Yes.
We hope to be able to do some marker-assisted breeding, especially hopefully for some disease resistance, because that's a tough trait.
A couple of questions. One is lodging not such a big problem as it seems to be from some of your pictures? And the second one is the fatty acid profile, how good it is in terms of health point of view.
So on the lodging issue, it can be a problem that is exacerbated with disease. So what you saw there was a combination of disease and just poor selection for lodging in that case. As far as the lines that we grow commercially and in our production fields, we don't tend to have a huge problem with lodging unless the lines get over-fertilized. If they get over-fertilized, they tend to grow vegetative up to my chin, and then they flower and all the weight gets too high. So there's some agronomic component to it also. And your second question was the profile of the fatty acid profile.
Oil quality.
We have done some work in that in the past. Before I came on with the company, we were collaborating with the USDA out of Georgia, a gentleman over there who's spent his whole career working on it, and we're trying to start looking into that as we start to delve into the quality factors. So I'm not sure exactly what the breakdown is.
What are the major soil-borne pathogens and also nematodes a problem?
So I'm gonna say I'm not a pathologist. Charcoal rot is a problem. Names that are thrown around are Phytophthora, Macrophylla. Those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head. But we haven't had any true pathology done. It's all just been selection. So we don't know what we're resistant to, which is why we really want to work with Dr. Cochran and validate and get an idea of what it is that's causing the problems. And it's not as prevalent as a problem as maybe I think, but it is a problem.
Did you say there was a hull when you harvested?
There was a hole.
A hull?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Well, there is a seed coat. There's not a hole in the sense of leaf. So natural sesame would not be whole, and you can eat it. You see it on breads.
So were your yields with that hole or without it? Or
with
coating?
With that hole.
Okay.
So 150% yield increase in 4 years is, pretty outstanding. And you were pretty transparent that a lot of that was agronomic. But how much of that is due to sealing up the holes on your small plot harvester?
Quite a bit. Yeah, like I said, and I think like Alan said too, showing up to dinner and not knowing what to do. It's really everything we implement has a problem because of sesame, and it's just a problem that we have to deal with. And there are holes in the combine. There are issues with the planter. There are issues with our thrashing equipment. There's issues with how we clean seed. It's just things that we've had to learn along the way. And thankfully, we've had a lot of support from some of the different companies that make that, and also from some colleagues that have given advice over time. And, that's really been a huge issue. That first year, I mean, really, to be honest, that first year, a lot of that data probably not very robust because there were problems that I just had no idea were happening. My combine was plugged up around because the seed was still moving through and fall out. So it's a challenge for sure.
Okay. Are we good with questions? Thank you. So let's give us a hand